There is a silence in the ruins of Byland Abbey that even the wind respects. Moss creeps gently between the broken flagstones, and ivy claws at the fractured choir walls. But nothing dares disturb the air beneath the crumbled arches. No birds sing here, though the forest encroaches from all sides. The sky may storm or hush itself into blue stillness, but the space inside the ancient stones remains paused, as if waiting for something that once came and might return. They say in whispers passed down from trembling lips that the silence began on a night of rain. It was the year of the Lord, 1328. Plague still lingered like smoke across the ridges of Yorkshire, and the Abbey of Byland, though spared the worst of its devastation, stood half forgotten among soaked meadows and sorrowing fields. The Cistercians who lived there were men of prayer and ritual, pale from candlelight and hunched by silence. They lived not for the world, but apart from it, swaddled in woolen habits and the dust of copied psalters. They tilled the wet land. They bound their texts. They bowed their heads in the dark hours before dawn. But among them lived one who carried more than faith. Abbot Eald Wine. Eald Wine was not the eldest, nor the most pious, but he was the quietest, the kind who listened after prayers had ended, who stayed behind when the bells fell mute, who wrote by moonlight when no candles were permitted, and whose ink never ran dry, though no brother saw him request a refill. He kept a ledger no other monk was allowed to see, and in it he scratched not homilies or histories, but something stranger, dreams, fragments, utterings heard, perhaps in sleep or in the rain. For it was the rain that awakened it. The abbey's crypt, buried beneath the chapel floor, had been sealed for generations. No relics remained within it. Entombed, just the cold breath of ancient stone and the thick scent of damp limestone. Yet when the rains came, those long, weeping rains of northern England that blurred the days and softened the ground, something changed beneath the flagstones. It began with a sound, not footsteps, not wind, not even rats, but a voice, not quite human and not quite beast. It came from below. Brother Cuthbert, the bell ringer, heard it first, just after Compline, as he lingered in the nave to light the final wick. A low humming, almost melodic, then a series of overlapping syllables, harsh, quick, rising in a rhythm no chantmaster had ever taught. He ran from the chapel, white with terror, and refused to return for 3 days. When questioned, he could say only, "It spoke backwards. It sang to something I could not see." Others heard it, too. The choir monk, Brother Oswin, claimed he awoke to the sound of bells tolling beneath his bed, a dozen at once, out of sync, as if under water. The cellarer, Brother Arne, found the grain sacks unknotted in the morning. Their contents poured into a spiral across the stone floor. Even the abbot's dog, a mute old beast with matted fur, began howling during rainstorms, its blind eyes fixed toward the crypt floor. But it was Abbot Ealdwine who stayed behind. When the storm returned one October night, black clouds, rolling like smoke across the moor, and the wind breaking upon the abbey walls like surf, he dismissed the brothers early from matins, told them to retire, said he would remain to pray. He did not lie. He stayed in the chapel alone, beneath the trembling arches, beside the wet stone columns, seated on the cold floor, with his ledger in his lap and the rain weeping through cracks. In the ceiling The candles flickered and went out, but still he wrote, line after line in ink, darker than any soot. He wrote what he heard. No human eyes ever saw that final entry. Only the young novice, Brother Thalm, who had disobeyed the order to sleep and crept toward the chapel, drawn by the silence, for no rain could be heard any more, only stillness, unnatural and thick. When Thelem entered, he found no abbot, only an open book on the altar, its pages scorched at the edges, curling inward like dying leaves. Around it, a ring of ash, no body, no footprints, no sign of struggle. The air smelled faintly of iron and roses. The dog lay in the corner, unmoving. The crypt door, sealed with plaster and stone for 200 years, had opened. No brother dared descend. They bricked the chapel floor the next morning without prayer or rite. The dog was buried at the cloister's edge, and Ealdwine's name was struck from the abbey rolls, not out of spite, but dread. The scorched ledger was locked in an iron coffer and sealed beneath the library steps. Some say its pages reappear. In certain nights, tucked between other books, the ink still wet, the words reversed, the parchment damp with rain. The abbey fell into ruin within 2 generations. The land was left untended, the roof crumbled, the stone darkened with lichen and time. But even now, centuries on, when the moors are swept with gray clouds and the wind comes down from the hills with the taste of salt and sorrow, some passers-by claim they hear it, a hum, a chant, faint and impossible, rising from the earth itself, not in praise, not in Latin, but something older, a language without God, a song that was never meant for ears. And if you kneel in the center of the ruined chapel, on the smoothest stone where no moss grows, and press your ear to the ground when the rain begins to fall, they say you might still hear what the abbot heard. But beware, for the earth remembers more than it forgives, and some silences are not empty, they are listening. The mountains do not speak, they endure, while men carve borders into parchment and crown one another in torchlit halls. The Alps sit eternal, pale and sleepless, their breath thin, their ribs hidden beneath drifts older than memory. And sometimes, in the highest passes, the wind carries something more than snow, a whisper, a name no longer written, a tale frozen not in ink or song, but in ice. They say he walked the Schneiderjoch alone. The year was 1291, a time when thrones cracked like old timber and the crowns of Europe passed from hand to bloodied hand. Empires frayed at the edges. Languages changed in the mouths of their own children. Castles held more ghosts than living kin. But in the south, in a valley shaded by pine and silence, a boy was born to a line already erased. Some said he was the last son of a forgotten kingdom, one of the old mountain thrones, dissolved by treaty and marriage, his title consumed like fire eats vellum. Others claimed he had no royal claim at all, only the will to make one. But the crest he bore, a lion eating its own tail beneath a shattered crown, had not been seen in over 3 generations. He was never named in the annals, no birth record, no baptismal scroll. Only in campfire songs and the mutterings of half-blind scribes did his story breathe. They called him the crownless king. He did not build a court. He gathered no priests, only mercenaries, men whose swords owed nothing to church or coin, followed him up the treacherous slopes. their boots biting into the snow crust, their banners blackened by sleet. Witnesses in Bern and Sion recalled seeing a small company moving eastward in the gray of late October, a time when shepherds descend and mountain roads vanish beneath the frost. Yet this group climbed, heavily armed, lightly prison. One traveler who passed them described their leader as tall, cloaked in gray, with a golden clasp at his shoulder shaped like a sun pierced by arrows. He did not speak, only nodded once, as if each gesture held a vow, and then they were gone. The pass closed with the storm. That winter, the winds clawed with particular hunger. Scree turned to avalanche. Tents vanished mid-watch. No bird dared the heights. By spring, no sign of the group remained. Not a banner, not a footmark, not a cry. Just silence, thick as burial linen, wrapped across the slopes. The years moved forward without them. Centuries passed, and then the ice began to weep. In the late 20th century, long after the tale had thinned into legend, the glaciers receded, not with fury, but slowly, as if offering back what they had taken. A shepherd's child discovered something strange while chasing a goat along the edge of the thaw. Not bone, not boot, but metal. Unearthed from the melt was a brooch, small, oval, and sealed in ancient goldwork, bearing the emblem of a lion consuming its own tail. The same crest once engraved on a ruined chapel's stone arch high in the pass. Beside it, the remnants of fabric, purple once, now grayed, threaded with silver. A sword followed, narrow and ceremonial, the kind meant not for war but coronation, too ornate to be carried into a snowstorm unless it belonged to someone who refused to go unmarked. And finally, a packet of parchment, 3 sheets, bound in oilskin, still legible. The seal bore no sovereign sign, only the imprint of a bare, open hand. The words were few. We do not reclaim by blood what the snows have already crowned. We return not to conquer, but to remember. If we vanish, let it be upon the highest place. Let no grave bear our name. Let the wind alone speak of us. No bones were found, no human trace, only these relics, laid not as if dropped, but arranged. A brooch, a sword, a letter, as if left on purpose, as if someone, before the final sleep, had chosen what would remain. Scholars dismissed it, a noble's failed pilgrimage, a deserter's fantasy, artifacts placed by smugglers or dreamers. But the old ones, the keepers of the inn near the pass, the grandmothers who still speak in the dialect of stones, they remember. They say there were always 2 shadows in that story, the king and the cold that loved him. They tell of a man who would not kneel to the emperors who fractured his homeland, who refused exile not by staying, but by climbing, who gave his name not to soil, but to sky, where no flag endures, and no man can own. The ice took his body, but not his story, even now. On nights when the stars scatter like coins across the dark, hikers report strange things, sounds of chainmail in the mist, the low mutter of a voice offering no language they know. One man, sleepless and shivering near the summit, swore he saw a line of cloaked figures just beyond his firelight. When he rose to greet them, they were gone, but his pack had been moved, and beside it, a stone waited with a gold thread, frozen into its surface. No one climbs the Schneidejoch without hearing the tale now, and every few decades, another relic emerges. A clasp, a wax-sealed ring, a fragment of map, half dissolved. The ice, it seems, remembers. Not with mercy, but with ritual. It does not bury it. Enshrines. So let the kings of parchment fade. Let the crowned of the lowlands sleep in their tombs of marble and wine. The true king, the crownless king, waits beneath the snow. No name, no grave, only the wind to carry his oath. And the next time the mountains shudder, when the thaw comes again, not with spring, but with silence, listen, for he may rise, not to reign, but to be remembered. It began with a fever, and a silence no bell could cut. Sister Meliora had been asleep for 3 days in the convent of St. Croix les Fleurs, nestled in the hills near Rouen, where the wind wore the scent of damp roses and old manuscripts. Her lips burned with prayers. She could not speak. Her fingers twisted in the folds of her blanket like roots in prayer. The other sisters passed quietly by her cell, murmuring psalms, cooling her brow with cloths steeped in lavender and rainwater. She had not moved until, in the early hours of a gray April morning, she opened her eyes and whispered, "The sky will bleed over the city, and the bones of kings will rise." She did not shout it. She did not tremble. She spoke the words with the calm certainty of someone remembering something that had already come to pass. The convent recorded her vision with the same ink used for saints' feast days and inventory lists. A young scribe named Avis noted it in the margin of a vellum-bound psalter beneath a depiction of the Passion. She drew a small drop of red beside it, decorative, perhaps, or devotional, but it bled through the page by morning. The sisters laughed gently at first. Meliora had always been prone to visions. As a child she'd spoken of angels walking beneath the orchard trees and of cloaked men weeping into the convent well. She was not scorned, she was beloved, but there had been something different in her voice that morning, something too still, too hollow, as if she hadn't returned alone from whatever place her fever had carried her. The rains came 3 weeks later. It began with a smell, copper, sharp and earthy, carried by wind that blew in from the channel. The sky that day was not gray, but a deep, bruised red, and the birds, starlings, crows, even the high hawks, flew inland in crooked, urgent spirals. No one spoke of it. They simply watched, fingers pressed to rosaries, waiting for the storm to pass. But when it did, the water that fell was not water. It was red, not rust, nor clay, nor the dusty color of southern rains, but red like fresh blood. It fell in sheets, streaking the convent's alabaster walls, soaking through veils and shutters, pooling in the stone cruciform paths between the herb beds. The sisters did not scream. They simply watched. One of them, Sister Imen, dipped her fingers into a puddle and cried out, not from pain, but from memory. She said it smelled like her father's butcher shop before he died. She did not speak again. The next morning, the crypt floor cracked open. It was a small tremor, enough to shake the chalices and dislodge a row of tiles near the altar. But beneath the stone was something the sisters had not seen in generations. Bones, dozens of them, stacked not in ossuary neatness, but in chaos, as if flung by unseen hands. Among them lay a crown, brittle, gold leaf, flaking like dead skin, bent into the shape of a serpent devouring itself. No records claimed a king was buried beneath the convent. No monarch had died in Rouen that year, or the year before. But one of the oldest sisters, nearly blind, claimed she had seen that crown before, in a dream she once had, years ago, of a man with no name kneeling in the rain. Melira had not spoken since the prophecy. She had returned to her cell after the first red storm and closed the door behind her. It remained locked for 5 days when the sisters finally broke it open. They found her seated beneath the small stained glass window that faced the eastern hills. Her habit was soaked. Her hair was loose. Around her, perched on the walls, on the rafters, on the floor tiles like black chess pieces, were crows, hundreds of them, silent, still, watching her. She blinked only once when the door opened, then turned her gaze slowly to the abyss and whispered, "It was not rain, it was their breath." The crows did not move. She was taken gently to the chapel, and Mass was held for her in silence. The sisters sang, but the sound seemed to bend oddly in the air, as if muffled by something vast and listening. That night, the crows vanished. So did Meliora. Her bed remained empty. Her robes were folded on the bench beside it, and in the place where her pillow had lain, a small red stain bloomed across the linen, like a flower pressed too long between pages. No footprints, no signs of struggle, only a parchment left in the chapel beside the broken crown. It read, "The sky remembers what the earth tries to forget, and when the bones rise, so too must the silence." The convent closed within the year. No plague swept through, no war touched its walls, but one by one the sisters left. Some fled to other cloisters, some vanished into the countryside. The last to leave was Avis, the scribe. She copied only one final line in the margin of the convent's ledger before sealing the book shut. She did not warn us. She warned what was beneath us. No nuns ever returned. The building still stands, half cracked and sunken into the hills, its windows dark, its door rusted shut. But on certain evenings, when the clouds gather low and the starlings swirl wide over the fields, red droplets appear on the stones again, faint, like old memory. And if one listens close enough, beneath the chapel floor, there is a sound not quite of dripping, but of breath. Perhaps the rain was never rain at all. Perhaps the sky weeps not for the living, but for what lies forgotten beneath them. And perhaps, in a world where even kings rot nameless, it is the fevered, cloistered heart of a single girl that remembers truth more deeply than any crown ever could. The Danube does not forget. Its waters are wide and slow, old as the bones of the earth. And somewhere in the soft churn between dusk and midnight, it murmurs of things never written. Travelers who pass its banks speak of ruined walls and crooked towers lit by moonlight, and of a castle, Krusenstein, whose breath still lingers between its stones, high above the river's northern bend, where the hills rise like folded cloaks. The fortress rests in uneasy silence. It watches without blinking, shoulders of stone hunched against the wind. Its battlements blackened not by soot or siege, but by memory. For there is a part of Krusenstein that no bird circles, a part no priest has blessed, a tower with no window, no light and no echo. The story begins not in blood or war, but in failure for 2 generations. The lords of Lower Austria tried to build a castle to rival any on the Rhine. Architects came and went. Stones were carved, lifted, and set, but each morning cracks reappeared. Whole sections of wall would buckle without reason. Vaults collapsed. Under clear skies, a spire raised by noon would lean by dusk and crumble by nightfall. They blamed the mortar, the weather, the curse of an old pagan burial site buried beneath. But nothing held. And then, one evening, a man arrived. He came from the east, walking without a cart or servant, bearing no tools, only a bundle wrapped in waxed cloth and a scroll sealed with red wax in the shape of a hammer. His name was Elias. Some said he came from Prague. Others whispered that he had once carved the vaults of St. Vitus Cathedral and vanished before its completion. He was tall, thin, and spoke with a voice like whetstone, soft but heavy. He requested no coin, no lodging, only one thing. He would complete the tower, all of it, in silence, without interruption. But no one, no worker, no noble, no priest, must enter the central stairwell until the first full moon had passed. The nobles, weary and ashamed of their half-born fortress, agreed. Elias began the next morning. He worked alone, no assistant, no beasts of burden. The workers were told to leave stones and lime at the edge of the site, and by dawn each had vanished. The scaffolding changed shape every night, growing higher without rope or nail. The sound of chisels rang at midnight. Torchlight flickered from behind slits that hadn't yet been carved. One soldier on watch claimed to see Elias walking sideways along the outer wall, placing bricks with gloved hands that glowed faintly in the rain. Within 27 days, the tower was complete. It rose smooth and narrow, topped by a pointed crown of slate. No gargoyles, no banners, just cold, perfect symmetry, and one door set in shadow at its base. The nobles gathered to celebrate. They stood in the morning sun with cups of spiced wine and prayers of triumph. They approached the door. It would not open. The iron handle turned, but yielded no latch. No voice came from within. The hinges did not creak. No chisel rang. They waited. On the third day, the stones began to hum, a low tremble that shivered through the walls, but made no sound. Children grew restless. Dogs refused to pass the courtyard. One knight swore he saw footprints circling the base of the tower, but when he followed them, they ended against the wall, as if the walker had vanished mid-step. On the 7th day, the nobles ordered the door broken. It took 3 men and a battering ram. Inside, there was no furniture, no pulley system, no sawdust, no hammer. The walls bore no tool marks. The spiral staircase rose in a perfect coil, smooth and seamless, to the upper chamber. But at the top, a blank wall, no window, no arch, no secret door, only a single stone set into the masonry, darker than the rest, inscribed with one word, Elias. They searched for him. Of course they did. They combed the forests, sent riders to Prague, offered gold and absolution. But no man named Elias had passed through any village. No mason's guild claimed him. No lodging house remembered his face. He had built the tower and disappeared, not into the night, but into the stone. Some claimed it was genius, that the architect had built himself into his own creation, a perfect offering to permanence. Others whispered that the tower was not built by hands, but by pact, a bargain made on moonless soil, in which flesh was traded for mastery. The price of creation sealed in lime and silence. The tower was never opened again. No banner hung from it. No servant swept its stair. It stood through war and storm, through invasion and famine, untouched and unclaimed, A noble's daughter once tried to climb it on a dare. She returned pale and speechless, blood seeping from her ears. She took the veil a month later, said the stones had whispered backwards. In time, the castle fell into shadow. The halls beneath it decayed. The courtyards flooded with moss. But the tower, Ilias's tower, remains unaged, its lines sharp, its crown unchipped. Even the slate shingles have not dulled, and still no one has ever entered twice. On clear nights, when the Danube breathes mist over the hill, the moonlight strikes the tower like a blade. It glows faintly, not gold, not silver, but something older, the color of candle wax seen through bone. And if one stands very still at the outer edge of the courtyard and listens with the ears of a child who has never lied, one might hear it, a sound like chisels, but lower, like breath between walls, like footsteps carved into silence. Some stones are laid with mortar, others with memory, and some, like those of the tower at Krusenstein, are set with a soul. They say time forgets everything. Names fade, stone crumbles. Even prayers dissolve in the dust between centuries. But there are places where time does not pass, places where candles do not melt and meat does not rot, where laughter lingers long after lungs have fallen still. And in the southern shadow of Arles, veiled by thickets of olive trees and the soft breath of cicadas, there was once a feast that never ended. It was the year of our Lord 1179, under a harvest moon the color of old blood. The town had grown quiet after a season of drought and whispered heresies. And so when word came that a bishop from the north would be passing through, the abbots and nobles of Arles gathered in frantic hospitality. They opened the old hall beside the cloister, a stone chamber built in an age when Romans still walked the roads and spared no expense. Casks of Rhone wine were unsealed, pigeons glazed in honey stuffed with rosemary and plums, wheels of cheese stacked like altars, and candles placed in rings along the long wooden table until it glowed like a path to heaven. They said the bishop's name was Giro, pale-skinned, thin-lipped, robed in velvet black despite the warmth. He arrived late as bells tolled for vespers. The sun had set, and the torches had been lit when he stepped into the hall, offering only a single nod and no blessing. He took his seat at the head of the table and raised a silver goblet with a smile that did not touch his eyes. The feast began. Wine was poured and poured again. Servants moved like shadows, their hands stained crimson with grease and grape. No one could recall the prayers spoken before the meal, only that they were long, and in a tongue none recognized. The bishop did not speak much, but when he did, his words were soft and precise, as if cut from ice. The musicians played, the fire crackled, and the air grew thick with roasted flesh, cinnamon, and a sweetness that clung to the throat like incense left too long in a tomb. At midnight, as the final toast rose to the faithful and the future, the bishop stood, his goblet lifted, his mouth opened to speak, but no words came. He smiled too long, his eyes flickered, and then, without sound, his body collapsed forward into the goblet, spilling dark wine across the table like spilled blood from a chalice. The hall froze. For a moment, only the fire moved. Then a scream, sharp and human, from one of the younger pages. Guests rose, chairs scraping violently across the stone floor, hands trembling, words tumbling in confusion. But when they turned, To flee, they found the doors were gone. Not locked, gone. The great wooden archway that had welcomed them hours earlier had turned to solid stone, seamless and cold. The windows no longer held the stars, only blackness, deep and wide, and heavy with nothing. Panic clawed through the hall like a wind. Some beat upon the walls, others prayed. One woman, it is said, tried to leap through the stained glass, only to find it had turned to painted clay. The bishop's body remained slumped, unmoving. And then the candles went out all at once. Darkness, utter and complete. When they returned, no one could say how long after the feast had changed. The meats had withered, blackened. Fruit had collapsed into mold. The wine had turned to vinegar, and the bishop's goblet lay on the floor, cracked, as though dropped not from a man's hand, but from time itself. Days passed, or hours, or years, none could tell. Sleep came, but did not bring rest. The fire still burned, though no wood was fed. When someone tried to touch the door again, it was warm to the touch, pulsing, as if something lived behind it. And then, slowly, the food renewed. One morning, the bread returned, steaming, soft. The meats reappeared, red and glistening. The goblets refilled, and the bishop's chair, empty still, was polished clean. Some refused to eat. They aged, withered, turned to husks in the corners of the room, while others watched in terror. Their bones remained upright for a time, then folded slowly, quietly, into ash. The others ate out of fear, out of hunger, out of surrender, and in doing so, they remained. The feast repeated. Always midnight, always the toast, always the bishop's name unspoken. Time passed outside, seasons turned, but within, the hall stayed constant. 12 chairs, 12 places, wine forever full, candles lit, but never dripping. When the ruin was discovered again in the year 1602 by a wandering monk seeking herbs in the hills, he found it half swallowed by earth and vine. A single stone building, cloaked in ivy, sealed with vines so tight no blade could pass through. But the door was there, unlocked. He entered, alone. The table was set. Plates glistened with still warm meat. Wine shimmered in silver goblets. At each seat, 12 in all, rested a heavy ring, bishop's rings, the kind worn by high clergy, each one tarnished but intact. He took nothing. He did not eat. He did not speak. When he emerged 3 days later, his beard had whitened, and his eyes would not meet the sun. He returned to his abbey, wrote a single page in his journal, and never spoke again. That page read, "They did not die, they were digested." The ruin was left untouched, sealed again, covered in prayer and salt. But still, there are those who say the feast continues, that in the silence of certain nights, when the moon rises red and the wind carries no echo, the sounds of clinking goblets and slow chanted Latin can be heard near the broken olive trees, that the door sometimes breathes, that the table never empties, and if a traveler, weary and hungered, should find themselves drawn toward the ruin's edge, something sweet will greet them on the air: rosemary, wine, warm bread, and a voice, not loud, not cruel, but patient, inviting, the kind of voice that waits centuries just to be heard again. Some hunger does not seek flesh, it seeks memory, company, ritual, and in the old feast hall of Arles, the candles are still lit, the table is still set, and something still waits to be served. The sea does not forget. It folds its memories in salt and hides them beneath centuries of silence. Cities vanish beneath its tides, languages dissolve into foam, and bells toll where no hand remains to ring them. But in the deep dark of the Breton coast, where the winds cry like lost women and the cliffs were the shape of drowned chapels, they say a church still waits beneath the waves, and that it sings for those who listen. The town of Ys was said to be the jewel of Brittany, a marvel built by pride and sea lace, once protected by gates of bronze and locks of iron that held the tides at bay. Some called it myth. Others remembered it differently, not as a city swallowed by time, but by something older, hungrier, a storm that came not from sky, but from within. The church was the heart of it, stone and spire, stained glass, the color of blood and sapphires, perched at the town's highest point, though even that had not saved it. They say the bells tolled as the sea came, not in alarm, but in welcome, and then all was gone. Centuries passed. The name Ys drifted from chart to legend, its streets becoming story, its gates becoming song. But the sea held something still. And in the spring of 1383, as the equinox drew the moon close, and the tides rose like breathing, it returned. It was a night like many others. The fishermen of Douarnenez had cast their nets, the wind soft and low, the salt stinging their skin, like prayer beads dragged across the flesh. But then, just before dawn, the sound came, a bell, not from shore, not from any vessel. It rang from beneath 7 times. The first was deep, muffled, the second clearer. By the third, the seagulls had fallen silent. The fourth sent ripples across the harbor. By the 7th, every man had dropped his line and turned to stare at the water, as if it had grown a face. One among them, Etienne Ledour, was known for his silence, a man of few words and steady hands, who tied his knots in the dark and never took communion, though he bowed his head when the others prayed. That morning, after the final bell, he stripped to his tunic, wrapped his hands in rope, and dove. The men called for him. He did not answer. Minutes passed, then hours. The sea stilled. Nets floated like discarded veils. Some claimed they saw a faint glow beneath the surface, like candlelight beneath cathedral glass. Etienne returned just after noon. He was dragged into the boat by trembling hands. His skin was cold, and his hair had gone white, not silver, not gray, but bone white, as if snow had melted into it. His lips were cracked, his eyes wide. He said nothing for a long time. Then, with voice like torn paper, he whispered, "Mass has begun." And he never spoke again. He lived another 20 years in the village alone. He carved nothing, wrote nothing, did not fish. He walked the cliffs barefoot, always pausing at the same spot, a crag of stone shaped like a broken cross, and stared out at the tide. When he died, they found a small wooden box beneath his bed. Inside, sea glass shaped like chalices, a shard of blackened iron shaped like a key, and a parchment, blank but stained with salt, that smelled faintly of wax and frankincense. They buried him facing the sea. The bell has been heard only rarely, since once, during a spring storm in 1491, 7 rings, each one louder than the last, though no church stood within 20 leagues. Again, in 1617, by a cartographer mapping the coast by candlelight, He recorded the tolls in his margins, alongside sketches of arches beneath the waves, and died 2 days later when his boat split open without cause. In the early 1900s, a naval crew reported sonar reflections near the shelf of Douarnenez, shapes too regular to be stone, too large to be wreckage, pillars, vaults, the outline of an apse. They turned back always. The bell rings in sevens, no more, no less the villagers, old ones, whose hands shake when they bless the bread, do not ask questions any more. They leave offerings along the shore each spring, loaves wrapped in linen, coins kissed and dropped beneath the cliffs, tiny bells carved of driftwood. It is said that in the hour before sunrise, when the tide reaches its breathless stillness, you can hear voices in the surf, not in French nor Breton, but in a tongue that tastes of ash and hymns. A priest once scoffed at the tale and stood on the beach alone, shouting prayers into the sea. His rosary was found the next day, tangled in seaweed. The beads turned to salt. He left the parish within the week and was never seen again. And still, the sea holds its silence, broken only by the bell. Perhaps it is not a call, but a warning. Perhaps the Mass continues, not for the dead, but for the drowned. Or perhaps, and this is the thought no one dares say aloud, it never ended, that the souls of ease kneel still beneath the waves, their candles lit in liquid dark, their prayers echoing through salt and bone, waiting for the final amen, and somewhere, deep beneath the tide, the spire still stands, the bell still waits, and every spring it tolls again, not for memory, but for attendance. Somewhere beyond the black breath of memory, in the dim corridor where time forgets its name, there is the image of a child, a boy, still pale, wearing no shoes, and in place of eyes, mirrors, not glass, not shine, but a gaze that holds not what stands before it, but what should not be seen, a reflection of things yet to break, faces not yet grieved, graves not yet dug. The year was 1349, when the plague roamed northern Italy like a shadow too large for any sun. It came on the backs of carts and rats, in the blood of butchers and the breath of priests. The bells tolled without pause, and the soil grew heavy with sorrow. In a village near the Lombard Hills, unnamed in maps, but once known for its lavender, fields and dove-gray chapel, the dead began to outnumber the living. Names were whispered like confessions. Coffins were buried, 3 to a pit. Hope, too, was laid beneath the ground. And then the boy came. He appeared on the chapel steps just after dawn, where the frost had not yet melted and the birds no longer sang. No one saw him arrive. There were no tracks behind him. His hair was dark but not black. His skin was pale but not sickly. He wore no cloak, though the wind bit cruelly that morning. And when Father Matteo found him barefoot, unmoving, hands at his sides, he first thought the child a ghost, but the boy breathed, blinking slowly, once, twice, and looked directly at the priest. That was when Father Matteo fell to his knees, for what he saw in the child's eyes was not his own. Reflection, not the aged lines of his face or the worn cords of his robe, but a stranger, a woman, weeping with a babe in her arms. A child Matteo had buried a year before. The boy did not speak. He pointed, not at the priest, but at the chapel door. Inside, they found Sister Carenza slumped across the altar, blood pooled beneath her robes, no wound visible, her face calm, her pulse gone. from that moment, the boy remained. He did not eat, he did not sleep, at least not where anyone could see. But he was seen standing beside wells, near the butcher's stall, in the shadow of the granary wall. And always he pointed, gently, slowly, with the stillness of a bell before it rings. Every name he pointed to died within a day, not in violence, not in fever, but as if their breath had been excused, quietly, simply, gone. But fear took the village, like a fever of its own. Mothers covered their children's eyes when they passed him. Men lit candles at noon. Some tried to flee, but found their paths blocked by flood or fire or wheel. One boy threw a stone at him. It never landed, and all the while the child remained, watching, waiting, reflecting. Father Mateo, torn between dread and duty, tried to speak with him. He brought bread and water, placed holy relics before the boy, whispered Latin prayers and folk charms alike. But the boy never flinched. Only once did the priest think he saw something change, a flicker, a tremble in those silvered eyes, when he asked, "Who sends you?" And for the first time, the boy raised both hands. He pointed at the sky and at the earth. That night, the priest dreamed of ash falling upward, of a handless clock, of a baptismal font filled with sand and teeth. When he awoke, the boy was gone. No footprints in the dust, no creak of door or cry of bird, just silence and a strange cold in the chapel that no fire could warm. A week later, the villagers found Father Mateo's face, not his body, his face, carved into the side of the stone, font where he had baptized every child for 30 years, the expression serene, the eyes closed, the mouth barely parted, as if whispering a final name. He was never found. Within a year, the village died, the fields grew wild, the roads overgrown, the chapel fell into ruin, stones cracked, vines split the floor, the bell rope rotted where it hung. But the child did not vanish, not truly, in towns across Lombardy. Frescoes began to show his shape, always tucked in corners, behind saints and angels. A barefoot boy with hollow hands. In one, he is behind the Virgin's veil, face turned slightly, eyes silvered. In another, beneath the table at the Last Supper, small and still, as if waiting for something to be said. In Milan, a mural revealed a shadowed figure, watching the plague carts painted over, then reappearing through the cracks years later. One scholar, cataloging the relics of forgotten chapels, claimed he found the boy's reflection in a reliquary glass. Though the room was empty, he died 2 days later. Heart stopped, pen still in hand. Even now, in backwater villages and crumbling basilicas, they speak of him, the boy with eyes like mirrors, who comes not to kill, but to reveal, a witness, a harbinger, a child sent not from above or below, but from between. Where time folds, where death waits, where faces yet unborn whisper through the dark. Some say he appears before plagues, before fires, before famine, that his gaze does not choose, but sees, that in his eyes you see not yourself, but who mourns you, and that he does not walk away, he simply walks ahead, still barefoot, still silent, still watching. There are books that gather dust, books that are copied, sold, read aloud in candlelight. There are books forgotten on shelves, cracked at the spine, pages brittle and yellowed. But once, and only once, there was a book that breathed. It did not whisper, though some say they heard it. sigh, it did not glow, though its ink shimmered when the moon was right, and though no pen ever touched it, the words were there. Waiting in the year 1421, in the shadowed forests of Saxony, where fog clings to timber like memory and the sun sets too early in winter, a sealed crate was delivered to the Abbey of St. Cunegond. No courier stayed to sign his name. No seal bore the mark of any noble house, just wax black, pressed with the image of a closed eye. The crate was warm to the touch, though the frost lay thick on the road, and it smelled faintly of sulphur, like burnt pine and something deeper, something metallic and old. The monks assumed it was a mistake. No commission had been made, no scribe expected, but they brought it inside, laid it on the table beneath the crucifix, and waited for morning. By dawn, 3 of them had dreamed the same thing, a forest of ink-black trees, each branch covered in words they could not read, a voice behind them, always behind, saying, "Not yet, not yet." When the crate was opened, the book inside did not resist. No dust rose, no squeal of wood, only silence, thick and oddly respectful, as if the shadows themselves were watching. The book was massive, bound in dark leather that seemed to smooth, as if no beast had ever worn it, no title, no clasp. The parchment within was thick, slightly green-tinted and unnervingly soft. The ink, dark but not black, shimmered in hues that changed with the light, violet, gold, something almost red. It smelled not of age, but of something freshly opened. The script did not match Latin, Greek, nor any tongue known to the abbot or his learned brothers. Symbols danced in spirals, branching like veins across the page. There were no page numbers, no margins, no headings, and yet it read like structure, as if there was sense. If one only knew how to look. Then came the illustrations, not wild, not mad, but precise. Too precise. Plants no one had seen, curled blossoms with mirrored petals, roots that grew in loops, leaves shaped like eyes. Some glowed faintly in pigment that no alchemist could reproduce. There were diagrams, too, of cities built underground, drawn as if through the walls, chambers stacked like honeycomb, stairways bending into the earth in perfect geometry. Others showed instruments, not quite musical, not quite mechanical, with threads that vanished off the page, but it was the faces that unsettled them most. Portraits, dozens of them, etched in silver ink, some no larger than a thumbprint, others spanning the full page. Their eyes were unfinished, their mouths mid-gesture, some blurred at the edges, as if moving, or waiting to move, and none could be identified. The book was given no name. It would not keep one. Each time the monks attempted to label it, the ink faded by morning. Even carved lettering on the wooden shelf faded to dust within days. One novice, Brother Odilbert, begged permission to translate it. He was bright, young, and had once memorized the entirety of the Psalms backward for penance. He began on a Monday. By Thursday, he was seen muttering to himself, fingers twitching in the air, as if tracing invisible letters. By the end of the month, he no longer responded to his name. One morning, he vanished. Nothing was taken from his cell. No footprints in the snow outside. Only the book remained, its pages slightly turned, and one line added in the same shimmering ink, just below a diagram of a hand with 6 fingers. I have entered the margin. They found him 10 years later, in a monastery near Innsbruck, blind, mute, alive. His fingers were curled, stiff, permanently shaped, as if turning a page, and in the dirt beside him, scratched with bone, were characters from the book, the same impossible script. Today, the manuscript rests in a locked glass case beneath the vaults of the monasteries. Archive, sealed with relics and wrapped in cloth. They no longer try to read it, but they do observe it. Sometimes the pages are different. Archivists have sworn, quietly, guiltily, that diagrams shift. A leaf that bent left now curls to the right. A face that once wore a veil now stares directly outward. No one touches it, but they listen. Because on nights when the wind moves through the chapel rafters just so, the glass fogs from within, as if something faint and slow is breathing underneath. And there are whispers, not loud, not language, but rhythm, like the rustle of quills, like ink being poured, like the slow, patient turning of pages written by no hand. The monks still light candles around the case, still cross themselves when the bell tolls once past. Midnight still leave the room when they begin to dream of forests made of script, of cities carved in bone, of faces that resemble their own, just slightly wrong, staring back from the end of a story they've never read. Because some books are not read to be understood, some are read to be remembered, and some are never finished. There are miracles that sing in the light, and there are miracles that stain the earth where they fall. In the holy year of 1304, when the papal court rested within the lavender-shadowed streets of Avignon, when the air was heavy with incense and judgment, a woman walked the square at dawn with bare feet and silent hands. Her name, in the tongues of stone and paper, has been lost, erased by decree, scattered by fear. But the people called her Selene. She was not a noble, nor a nun, not a sorceress, not a scholar. She lived in a narrow room above a baker's stall, and her only tools were linen cloths, dried herbs, and the rosary carved from olive wood she wore around her wrist. She healed with touch, with stillness, with a breath of song sung just below the threshold of speech, and sometimes she wept. They said it began in spring, when the river ran high and thick with silt. Selene was found one evening kneeling beside the cathedral wall, her cheeks streaked not with tears, but with something that gleamed. The light caught it strangely, not wet, not warm, gold dot, not the gold of coin, but soft, luminous, like candlelight, melted into metal. It ran from her eyes in slow rivulets, staining her shawl. Her palms, too, bore wounds, not scabbed or torn, but open, gently bleeding, not red, but gilded, perfumed, sweet dot. At first, they came in silence, the sick, the grieving, those whose children had turned blue with fever, those whose backs had bent with sorrow. They left not rejoicing, but trembling, as if they had seen something not meant for this world, as if they had tasted beauty too deep to swallow. But word does not sleep. It spreads, and soon the priests came. They brought scrolls and stern eyes. A bishop robed in scarlet stood before her with inked fingers and silvered tongue. He asked her to confess, to explain, to repent. Selene said nothing, only bowed her head. When pressed, she said softly, "I ask for peace, nothing more." But her hands bled again, and the gold stained the stone. That night they chained her. The trial lasted 3 days. They read aloud charges of heresy, of unnatural signs, of blasphemy wrapped in beauty. They accused her of consorting with alchemists, of drawing pagan spirits through illusion. They cited scripture, trembling. They brought witnesses who stammered when recalling her gaze, how it made them forget fear for a moment, how it made the world grow quiet. But miracles not sanctioned are called curses, and so the sentence was given. She was to burn. On the morning of her execution, the sky was a pale gray, thin as breath. A crowd gathered in the square, tight-lipped, feverish, unsure whether to kneel or look away. Some brought stones, others flowers. The bishop arrived late, eyes heavy. No psalms were sung. She walked without chains. Her steps left no print. They say that when she reached the pyre, she turned once, slowly, and looked out over the crowd. Some swore her eyes were gold, others mirrors. She said only, "Do not be afraid of fire, only forgetfulness." The flames took her swiftly. No scream rose, only silence, only the crackling of dry wood. The scent was not of burning flesh, but of myrrh, and something sweeter. When the fire died, they approached to scatter the ash, but her bones remained unbroken, luminous. They shimmered, not like treasure, not like relics, but like something seen only once in a lifetime, and never understood. The bishop turned away, but one monk, young, trembling, stepped forward and took a single fragment of ash. He said nothing. He hid it in a pouch at his breast and returned to his scriptorium. There. He ground the ash into ink, not all of it, just enough to fill one small vial. He used it sparingly to illuminate the margins of psalters, to underline the names of saints in a dying book, to draw the final letter of the final line of a quiet poem about mercy. The words written in that ink never faded. Even now, centuries later, when the vellum curls and the leather cracks, those letters remain as if they were still being written, as if the ink remembers the hand. Archivists whisper that those pages glow faintly in candlelight, that when left alone, some shift, that margins widen, that the letters breathe. Tucked in the back of an old breviary, bound in worn leather, bears her name, scrawled faintly in the corner, Solani. No title, no life story, no date, just a name, written once in gold that does not gleam like gold. A name that hums when touched, a name that waits. And so the question remains, was she a sinner cloaked in false wonder, a saint denied the seal, or something untranslatable? A prayer given flesh, not to be understood, but to remind. Because some light does not shine, it bleeds, and some truths do not burn, they remain. There are places the sun forgets, places where time moves, not forward, but sideways, through stone, through silence, through the spaces between breath and thought, in the hills that curl like sleeping beasts above, the old forests of present day. Slovenia, there once stood a monastery carved from pale stone, veined with ochre and ash. It was not marked on early maps. No patron's name crowned its threshold. It simply was, as though the hills had sighed once, centuries ago, and left a shape behind. The locals would not name it. To name something is to bind it, to welcome it into memory. And this place did not want memory, only silence. Its true name, if it ever had one, has been ground away by weather and wind. But the villagers, in hushed tones, called it Samolstenbrez, sense, the monastery without shadow, because no matter the time of day, no matter the angle of the sun, the cloister inside that monastery never dimmed, not even by a finger's width. The sun would rise and fall across its arches, would strike the outer walls with sharp gold and cold silver, but the inner cloister, a square of open stone ringed by narrow columns, remained evenly lit, not bright, not glowing even. There was no shade, no line where light faded, no sharp edge where stone turned dim. It was not darkness nor light, it was neutrality, as if the sun, in crossing the sky, bowed its gaze and moved around that one still place. The monks who lived there were of no particular order. Their robes bore no color, their chants no music. They spoke only when needed, prayed only when unobserved, and accepted no visitors after dusk. Their silence was not solemn, but attentive, the way an empty room listens after a door has been shut for generations. The villagers avoided the hills, even though the path was green and straight. Children were warned away. Shepherds turned their flocks before the tree line, and no one rang the church bell in town on the feast day of St. Castellus, the martyr of confinement. But in 1492, a man came who had not heard the warnings. He was an architect, imperial, inquisitive, sent by the court of Maximilian to catalogue sacred sites across the empire. He bore parchment, quills, measuring cords, and a compass that had once been kissed by the Bishop of Salzburg. His name was Albrecht, and he had studied the domes of Florence, the crypts of Cologne, and the ossuaries of Prague. No building unnerved him. He arrived on the first day of Lent. The monks welcomed him, as they did all things, quietly, without resistance, without warmth. He was shown the cloister. He walked its perimeter. He laid down his compass, marked the hours, and then he stopped. When he raised his hand to the sun, no silhouette met the stone. He stayed the night in the guest cell, and by dawn he was weeping, not loudly, not in fear, but like a man who has remembered something too large for language. He left at midday, refusing food, speaking only once to the oldest monk at the gate. He said, "The walls, they breathe backward." His hands shook. He could not hold the reins of his horse. He rode with his head turned, as if the light might follow him. Albrecht returned to Vienna, but did not continue his work. He locked himself in a room above the river and would not speak of what he'd seen. A neighbor found him 3 weeks later, eyes open, mouth filled with ash. His notebook lay beside him. It was empty. Within the year, the monastery fell silent. Travelers who passed through the valley reported no smoke from its chimney, no movement in the garden, no monks on the path. The birds no longer nested near its walls. When a party of friars from Carinthia arrived to investigate, they found no doors sealed. The gates were ajar. Candles had burned to pools of wax on the altar. Bowls sat unfinished, spoons still resting on bread, but the cells were empty, the cloister untouched. No blood, no theft, no sign of departure, just absence. One of the friars touched the cloister wall. He claimed it was warm, and beneath the stone he heard a sound, not wind, not whisper, breath, slow, inward, as if something old and patient was drawing in. They did not stay. The monastery was sealed by decree, its name struck from the rolls. But still, at dusk, even now, the ruins cast a strange light. The sun may vanish behind the hills, but the inner stones glow with a pale, unchanging hue. Not illumination, presence. Those who've approached, since, say, the grass near the monastery grows in perfect circles, that no dew gathers on the flagstones, that when you speak aloud near the old cloister, your voice returns to you too quickly, as if it never left your throat. Some say the monks did not flee, that they were gathered by whatever dwells beneath the breathless stone. That silence was not their vow, but their offering, because not all sanctuaries are built for the living. Some are built to contain, and in a cloister, where no shadow falls, where no sun dares write its name, the walls still. They remember the monks who prayed, not for light, but for stillness. They remember the architect who saw too clearly, and they remember what was sealed beneath the floor, not in chains, but in reverence. A stillness too vast to measure, a silence so deep it became form. And perhaps even now, when dusk lingers too long, when light behaves strangely at the edge of your eye, it is that same silence breathing outward again, slow, steady, and waiting to be seen. There are melodies that rise with joy, sung in candlelit chapels, written into gold-inked psalters, spun like incense through the vaults of holy places. But there are other songs, quieter, older, sung not with voice, but with something deeper, something stitched from silence and suffering, shaped by hands that never trembled even as the world collapsed in the spring of 1348. Venice wept beneath a black sky. The plague had arrived. It slipped through the lagoon on ships with torn sails, hidden in sacks of flour, in the fur of rats, in the breath of men who coughed behind silks. Bells tolled and tolled again, until the wind itself seemed filled with prayer. The air thickened. The gondolas carried not lovers or merchants, but wrapped bodies, swaying gently beneath black cloth. Whole islands fell silent. Markets shuddered. Saints were buried beside thieves, and in the San Zaccaria district, not far from the lapping hush of the sea, a convent stood like a question the sky had forgotten to answer. It was an old place, older than the stones remembered, built before the city wore her masks, once home to noble-born daughters and cloistered visions. Its foundations ran deep into the marshes, into the dark, water-veined earth where bones softened and voices echoed strangely. For weeks, the sisters remained untouched. They prayed behind iron grills, fasted, sang, while the plague painted crosses on doors. The convent walls held firm, until one morning, when a young novice, Sister Alda, was found with black petals blooming along her neck, her eyes open, her hands folded, her mouth humming, though no breath stirred. They buried her in the catacomb beneath the convent, where the oldest nuns had been laid, deep beneath the tiled chapel, past a sealed stair that twisted like a question into the earth. And that night the music began. It came faintly at first, drifting up through the cracks in the stone like a mist. High voices, layered and slow, not in Latin, not in any tongue known to choir or scripture, wordless, ageless, a song shaped like grief, but held aloft, as if it had never fallen. The sisters gathered in the chapel, trembling. No one dared speak. Some fell to their knees. Others wept without knowing why. By dawn, the music stopped, but the next night it returned, each time stronger. The city did not hear it. Only those within the convent's walls and the gondoliers who passed quietly through the canals at the hour before sunrise, heads bowed low, oars slowing without reason. The Mother Abbess ordered silence, ordered fasting. But the music came all the same. It did not weep, it did not warn, it simply was. One night, Sister Lena, the oldest among them, descended to the catacomb alone. She carried a single candle and a relic of Saint Apollonia pressed to her breast. The other nuns prayed until their lips bled. When Lena returned, she said only this: "They are not gone. They are not singing with mouths." That night, she did not sleep. The next morning, she was found on the chapel floor, her hands lifted as if conducting a silent choir, her eyes sewn shut with black thread. By now, 3 others had begun to hum in their sleep, same notes, same rhythm, always just before dawn. They did not wake. The priests were summoned, stone by stone. They broke the seal that had held the catacomb for nearly 2 centuries. No pestilence rose, no stench of rot, only the faint scent of wax. And something bitter, like burnt cloth, inside. They found robes, dozens, arranged in circles across the floor, pressed flat, as if the bodies had simply melted away. Each robe held its shape, sleeves outstretched, hoods folded neatly, as though laid by careful hands. But no bones, no hair, no skin, just thread and mouths, stitched mouths, pieces of velvet embroidered into the flagstones, arranged in spirals, each one pulled closed with thin black string. Hundreds of them, no name, no plaque, no record. The priests fled. The catacomb was resealed, but not before one young nun, trembling, placed her hand on the archway and whispered, "I sang with them. I remember." She died before the sun rose. No illness, no wound. Her throat was found lined with ash. Years passed. The plague left. Venice stirred again. The markets bloomed. Masks returned. But the convent did not forget. No novices joined. The walls grew cracks. The chapel dulled. And still, the music returned. Not every night, only some. Only when the air thickened with salt and stillness, when the moon hung low and pale, when the sea pulled back as if to listen. Gondoliers, older ones with hands gnarled by rope and prayer, say the song is clearest when the bells of San Giorgio fall silent. They say the voices rise from the water itself, a song that does not rise, does not beg. A song that remembers. Today, the convent is empty. The doors are sealed. The windows dark. Tourists pass by, snapping pictures of a building whose history is written in silences. But locals leave candles on the water during plague season. They float small lilies down the canal. They hum sometimes as they do it, though they cannot name the tune. And sometimes, if you stand near the old gates just before dawn, you may hear it. Not loud, not even music, just presence. A hum beneath the breath of the city. A song stitched into stone. And you may wonder then, was it mourning, a warning, a memory too deep to name? Or perhaps something else entirely? A prayer with no language, sung not with voice, but with soul. There are woods in the world where time does not pass, only lingers in the deep, black-veined shadows of 17th century Württemberg, where the pines knit themselves so thickly overhead that even daylight grew hesitant. There was said to be a clearing shaped like a forgotten breath, and within it stood a crooked cottage made of slate moss and sorrow, the home of a man who counted not years, but seconds, who built machines not to serve, but to remind. The WATCH Maker. No one remembered his full name. Some said Johann, others whispered Matthias, or something older. But all who lived within a day's walk of the forest called him Ormakor der Rückkehr, the watchmaker of the return, because his clocks did not tick forward, they ticked back. The villagers knew of him, first by rumor. The baker's son had once followed the man through the fog and found his footprints reversed heel to toe, as if the man was walking away from the present. And the priest's own timepiece stopped each time the watchmaker passed the chapel gates. He never smiled, he never prayed, but his eyes, they did not look at things. They looked through them, and sometimes, when he stared too long, the crows went silent. The villagers feared him, but not with hatred, only reverence, the kind reserved for storms and gravestones. A few, desperate or foolish, tried to commission his work, a wedding clock, a burial dial, a cuckoo to bless a new inn. He always refused. He would simply vanish into the trees, as if time swallowed him whole, until the nobleman came. Herr Friedrich von Halberstadt was not a man used to denial. He owned 3 estates, 17 horses, and a daughter who had not aged in 5 years. She was beautiful, silent, unmoving, forever 10. Her eyes open, her chest rising, her fingers curled around an ivory doll whose face had long since worn away. The physicians called it a miracle. The priests called it a warning. Friedrich called it unfinished. And so he summoned the WATCHMAKER. No letter, no offer, no plea, just a command, and a carriage sent into the forest, with a guard, an empty seat, and a purse heavy with gold. The watchmaker came 3 days later, uninvited. He entered the manor without a sound, clothed in black wool stained with something gray and dry. He did not bow. He did not blink. He stared at the girl and said, in a voice like a clock spring snapping, "She does not know when she is." Friedrich ordered him to build a clock, not just a clock, the clock, a masterpiece, a mechanism that could hold all time within it, stop it, shift it, heal it. The watchmaker did not answer. He simply left, but he returned a month later, dragging behind him a tall shape draped in linen, taller than any man, wider than any door, rimmed in iron filigree that shimmered not like metal, but like something wet and half-seen. It took 3 men to lift it into the great hall. He gave no instructions, only this: at midnight, let it speak once, only once. Then he walked away into the forest, leaving behind a silence so dense that the fire in the hearth seemed to cower. The clock was unlike any made by human hands. Its face bore no numbers, only symbols that twisted if stared at too long. Its hands moved, not clockwise, nor counterclockwise, but in spirals, slow, deliberate, impossibly precise. And behind its glass, instead of gears or springs, there appeared to be liquid, thick, silver, and trembling. That night, as the candles dimmed and the household waited with breath pulled taut, the clock rang once, one deep toll, and every clock in the manor stopped. The grandfather in the drawing room, the pocket watch in the steward's coat, even the water clock in the conservatory froze, its droplets suspended mid-fall, and so did the servants. A maid carrying a tray of bread turned to stone, her eyes wide, her mouth mid-word. A guard froze mid-step. The steward sat unmoving, wine trembling at the rim of his glass. The air thickened, as if pressed between panes of glass. Only the nobleman's daughter blinked, just once, then stillness. It passed in less than a minute, but one maid, the youngest, Lena, never moved again. Her body remained standing, eyes open, breath gone, smile faint, not dead, but unreachable. The candle she had been holding burned all the way to her palm without waking her. And when they found the watchmaker, days later, after the snow had melted and the streams ran black with thaw, he was lying face down in a basin of mercury behind his cottage, his body untouched, his eyes open. His tools were rusted through, though no rain had fallen. His sketches, unreadable, melted, as if heat had come from within the parchment itself. But the clock remained. Friedrich ordered it sealed in the vault beneath the manor, behind stone and salt and locks carved with prayers. And yet once each year, at midnight, on the same night the clock first rang, all the timepieces within a mile go still, only for a moment, long enough for the heart to miss a beat, long enough to remember. Those who feel it speak of a weight, a pressure behind the ribs. Some say they hear a note, not a chime, not a bell, but something more intimate, like breath over bone. And the girl, she never aged. She was last seen walking into the forest, barefoot, holding the ivory doll in one hand and a key in the other. No, one followed, because some clocks are not made to tell time. They are made to keep it, to hold it fast, to punish it, or to free what time tried to forget. And in the cold woods, where light is slow to land, the watchmaker's gift still waits. Behind stone, behind iron, behind the hush of snow, its hands still turn, even when no one watches, even when no one remembers. There are roads that do not end, only disappear for a time. They wind beneath mountains, across dust-choked valleys, through groves where no leaves grow, and through cities that once held names, but now only echo. And sometimes, only sometimes, along those roads walks a figure, barefoot, alone, quiet as breath before prayer. They called him the pilgrim who walked without feet. The first sighting came in the blistering heat of Anatolia. Sun bled down on the hills like oil set alight. Dust choked the sky. Armored men died by thirst, faster than by sword. And yet, amid the sand and ash and silence, they saw him, a man in plain robes, barefoot, unmoving even in the heat. His robes were linen, too fine for a commoner, too humble for a priest, and his face was pale, untouched by the sun, though he had no cloak to shield him, and his feet bore nothing, no sandals, no blood, no mark in the dust where he stepped. A French knight, half mad from fever, rode up to him and demanded his name. The figure turned slowly and answered in a whisper so soft it scattered with the wind. "Not yet," he said. Then he turned and walked on. Others saw him days later, still walking east, through dead orchards and scorched towns, where even the crows had fled. He was seen again outside Jerusalem, unmoved by the siege, the fire, the wailing, always walking, always quiet. A Templar, Brother Marius of Antioch, recorded that he followed the man for 2 nights through the ravines east of the city. He never slept, never turned. His steps made no sound. When Marius tried to catch up, he found nothing, only a circle of smooth, warm stones, and a skeleton seated upright on a rock, spine straight, its legs folded beneath it. There were no feet, but the bones were warm to the touch. The brother burned his journal and retired from the order. He lived out his years blind, claiming he had glimpsed something that could not be named. Over the next century, the figure appeared again, not often, but just enough to leave memory behind like a faded candle mark on stone in the foothills of the Alps. A shepherd boy saw a man walking across snowdrifts without leaving prints at the edge of a battlefield in northern France. A dying soldier said a man in robes passed between the bodies, touching their brows, whispering, "Not yet," before moving on. In a ruined abbey outside Canterbury, a nun claimed she saw the figure standing at the altar where her sister had died days earlier. He had no shadow, no breath, but when she blinked, he was gone, and the wax from every candle had melted smooth. The church could not place him. He bore no icon, no scripture, no wounds, no ring, no rosary, and yet, slowly, he began to appear, not in doctrine, but in stained glass, tucked in corners of basilicas and cloisters, in the margins of psalters and missals. A barefoot man, hooded, faceless, walks between saints, across landscapes painted with loss and sky, always walking, always silent. No patron saint bears his name, but artists added him anyway. Some said their hands moved without command, that they painted before they thought. In the Cathedral of Burgos, one pane glows with his figure in deep sapphire and dusk purple. Glass stepping across a sea of bones. No bishop commissioned it, and still the sightings continued. One chronicler claimed the man was seen near the gates of Constantinople, the day before its walls fell. A Benedictine monk, near death, whispered in his final hour that the barefoot figure had stood at the foot of his bed, watching. He asked nothing. He offered no mercy. He only waited. Not yet. Are dozens of testimonies, all scattered, all incomplete. A soldier's prayer, half-written, a child's drawing found behind an altar, a bell ringer who claimed he saw footprints appear on his chapel floor, backward, always the same figure, always the same stillness, always the same words, not yet. But the mystery deepened when a mason repairing a chapel wall near Assisi unearthed a sealed chamber behind the altar. Inside, a body seated cross-legged, robed in linen, undisturbed by time. The skull had no lower jaw. The ribs pressed lightly outward, as if in a final, serene breath. And where the feet should have been, nothing, just smooth stone. Yet the robes were unstained, the eyes closed, no relics were taken, resealed within the week. What was he? A soul who could not rest, a warning carried by the road itself, or something older, not sent, not summoned, but drawn, a witness, perhaps, who walks the edges of death, whispering a delay, a mercy, or a curse. No one knows, but the figure still appears, a pilgrim seen at the edge of villages before plague arrives, a stranger walking a ridge moments before an avalanche, a silent man who stares from the shore just before the ship is lost. Those who see him say his eyes reflect not the sky, but a memory you haven't made yet, a moment you dread without knowing why. They say that when you meet his gaze, something inside you goes quiet, not in fear, but in pause, because it is not time yet, not yet. Perhaps the road was never meant to end. Perhaps he walks not for us, but before us. Carving the path, holding the hour, waiting not for death, but for its echo. And if someday, in the hush between heartbeat and silence, you feel a stillness enter the room, and the candle flickers without wind, has arrived again, barefoot, watching, whispering, that most sacred, untranslatable thing, not yet. There are doors that do not open so much as breathe. Wood swollen with time, iron hinges that groan like old bones, and silence so heavy it presses behind your eyes. In the oldest corridors of the University of Salamanca, far beneath the parchment-scented cloisters and golden sandstone halls, there is a stair that ends in nothing, or so they say. The wall at its base holds no handle, no lock, but sometimes, when the night is long enough, it thins. They call it La Sala del Olvido, the room of forgetting. It does not appear on any map. No professor references it, and no tour dares pass the third corridor beneath the Eastern Archives. But among certain monastic orders there is a record, a caution, a whisper inked in margins and footnotes, always unsigned. In the year 1510, during the height of Spain's theological consolidation, a monk named Friar Lazaro was assigned to catalogue the university's forbidden texts. These were not merely heretical works, they were older than heresy. Scrolls bound in ash-blackened vellum, codices written in languages that never bore a country, books wrapped in silk that bled when cut. Lazaro, it is said, did not fear them. He spoke only once of the work, telling a visiting abbot, "They are only voices that forgot who they were speaking to." He worked in a locked room deep below the library. At dusk, he would descend alone, lantern in hand, and return before the final bell. Until one day, he did not return. The guards who broke down the door were met not with violence or fire, but with something stranger. There was no monk, no blood, no overturned chair. His robe lay folded on the flagstone floor, still warm. The oil in his lamp had not yet cooled. Yet every book in the chamber, hundreds, stacked in rings, spread across tables, wedged into candle niches, sat open, still, expectant. But something had changed. Each page had been wiped clean of names, every author gone, every dedication erased. Places, people, epochs, where once had been identity, now lay only emptiness. It was as if history itself had swallowed its tongue. Even the library's catalogue, meticulously kept by ink-stained clerics for generations, now bore gaps, ink dissolved midward. A shelf once marked Tratados de la Serpiente Cega was now simply Tratados. A codex once referenced as El Libro del Espejo, Sin Reflejo, became El Libro del Espejo. A scholar named Fernando tried to reconstruct the titles from memory, but within the week he began forgetting his own, signing his work simply. His colleagues watched his mind unwind slowly, like parchment left too long in rain. When he could no longer recognize his reflection, he was quietly taken to a monastery in Segovia. His room had no mirrors. They sealed the chamber after that, or so they claimed, but nothing ever truly seals. Over the next decades, archivists began leaving notes pinned to the outer wall, not warnings, not keys, but names, their own. Julian de Toledo entered noon. Lucia M. Lightkeeper. We are real. One parchment read in crabbed Latin. We are still here. Sometimes, hours after entering, they returned, changed, eyes unfocused, unable to recall a mother's name or the name of the saint whose icon hung around their neck. One man, a Jesuit known for translating ancient Greek, returned with his tongue blackened, not burnt, but erased. His voice never returned. His journals afterward were blank. Those who dared enter and survived described a chamber colder than earth, where dust does not settle and parchment never crumbles. The books, they say, breathe lightly, not opening by hand, but turning on their own when spoken to, whisper your name in the center of the room, and the pages flutter in a sudden hush as if tasting you. One scribe, in a fever dream after collapsing outside the door, claimed that the room is not built of stone at all, but of layered memories stacked like pages, bending with time. He said the walls are made of books that have forgotten they are books, and within those walls one can still hear footsteps, slow, barefoot, pacing between the shelves, as if someone, something, continues to read, but none remember Friar Lazaro's full name. Not anymore. Only the folded robe remains behind glass. It bears no tag, no plaque, just a small strip of aged paper tucked inside, with one word scratched in faded ink. Yo. I. What is the room of forgetting? A vault for knowledge, too sacred to bear identity. A wound in the fabric of language, or a punishment, not for knowing too much, but for daring to remember. They say names are power, that to speak someone's name is to summon their soul. But what, then, is the cost of forgetting one? What becomes of the self that can no longer be called? Archivists, today, walk past that lower stair quickly, eyes down. They say it always feels a little colder there, even in spring. No one admits to entering, but sometimes, in the quietest hours, the record books misplace a name. A signature vanishes from a scroll. A monument inscription crumbles on only one face, and still, fresh notes appear on that sealed door, pinned with trembling hands. Always the same shape, a name, a time, a promise to the stone. I was here, so that if the room opens again, and it always does, for someone, they might remember the shape they once held, before the silence turned their memory into dust, before the books learned to read back, before their name joined the list of those never spoken again. Even stone can remember suffering if it is asked to hold it long enough. And at Ponery Castle, the stone remembers everything. It stands still and crooked above the Argic River, like a broken tooth in the mouth of the mountains. Its towers blackened, not by fire, but by long patience. The path to reach it twists through wind-stripped ridges and echoing firs. A trail so narrow that even the air dares not move too quickly. Crows nest in the crags. Ivy curls like old veins around the fortress. Spine. And within those walls, behind a door no longer marked, there is a room that does not echo. No one knows who set the table, or why the silver never tarnishes, but the plates remain, 12 of them, a 13th at the head, unused, waiting. In the spring of 1462, the region swelled with betrayal. The boyars' noble families, their lineages steeped in blood and pride, had once helped Vlad to power, but loyalty is a currency, and it was spent too early. Rumors whispered of plots to depose him, to trade one cruelty for another. And so Vlad, always careful with shadows, invited them to a feast. 12 noblemen arrived under skies, too clear to trust, their horses restless, their robes heavy with perfume and pride. They had heard of Vlad's cruelty, who had not but believed themselves above it. They were men of name, of lineage, of letters sent by kings. Surely they were being summoned for clemency, or negotiation, or one final stern warning before things returned to normal. Poenar. I greeted them not with fanfare, but with silence. There was no music, no heralds, no servants, only a single long table, beneath vaulted stone, a fire that burned low but never flickered, and Vlad, seated already, as if he had been waiting for centuries. His eyes, they say, were pale that night, not colorless, but thinned, like light passed through too much glass. He said nothing, merely gestured for the men to sit, and so they did. The meal was served, though no one saw how. Platters appeared, meats that steamed without scent, wine darker than blood. No spoons, only knives, forks of iron, goblets chilled, the earth itself. They say not a single word passed between them. The nobles dared not speak first, and Vlad, smiling faintly, simply observed, one hand resting lightly on the table, the other tracing idle circles on the wood, as if measuring time by touch. Then, when the last course was cleared by no one, Vlad stood, and each man's shadow, cast by no visible flame, began to move. Witnesses outside the chamber, to guards who were later found mute and weeping in the chapel, swore they heard scripture being read, but not spoken, recited, and not forward, in reverse, as though the stones themselves were choking on the verses, trying to spit them back. The guards did not open the door. They could not. Their keys snapped in their hands. By morning, the chamber was locked, the table untouched, the plates still laid, and the nobles gone. Not a drop of blood, not a trace of ash, just the chairs pushed in politely, as if the guests had excused themselves quietly during dessert. A year passed, and then 12 invitations were delivered, handwritten, each one bearing the seal of the House of Draculic to the widows, to the sons, to the cousins of those who had dined. They read only join them in remembrance. Supper is served, none accepted. Yet every one who received an invitation died within a fortnight, slumped over meals, collapsed mid-prayer. Their final expressions, it was noted, seemed listening. No one speaks of what was eaten that night. No recipe was recorded. No servant survived, but one monk, years later, while copying psalms by candlelight, wrote a single line into the margin of his manuscript before blinding himself with a quill. What feeds on silence learns the taste of names. To this day, the room in remains sealed, not by lock or law, but by knowing, the kind of knowing that grows in old wood and sighs in chimney stones. Travelers who camp too near its walls report dreams of clinking glass, of knives scraped gently against pewter, of soft, wet chewing that stops the moment they wake. Sometimes brave souls climb to the fortress, some to prove courage, others chasing myth. A few bring offerings, bread, wine, salt, and leave them by the iron gate. These are usually left untouched, but sometimes the salt is gone by morning, and the air smells faintly cooked. Say silence still rules the feast, that even in death the diners obey the command of stillness. Some claim the table is now full, that the chairs can hold no more, but others say there is always one more seat, the 13th, waiting at the head for someone bold enough, or foolish enough to speak first. And should that happen, should a voice break the silence once, More perhaps the shadows will move again, and perhaps this time the meal will not end. It is a strange thing to feast without hunger, but stranger still to be remembered only by the empty space where your voice should be. In Ponarai, the stone does not weep. It listens, and it is always listening for the next guest to arrive.